and welcome to the Soutiens and KMA webinar to talk about how employers can better support their working parents. And we know that there are a lot of questions around this, and that's why we're very happy to have Soutiens today, Amanda and Sarah, who are going to be leading most of the presentation. And we do want people to please feel free to ask questions throughout the chat, and we'll get to them as we can, and we'll definitely leave space for questions and answers near the end as well. So go ahead, Amanda and Sarah.
Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm Sarah Douglas, and along with Amanda Hem, we co-founded our company Soutiens, and we've built Soutiens to help support working parents and the companies who value them. So we create long-term relationships with companies, and we help these companies build more parent-friendly workspaces by bringing in education, support, and community building opportunities for working parents, really of all ages and stages. And so we're grateful to Rhoda and to KMA for providing this opportunity for us to speak with you all. So today we're here to talk a bit about the challenges that working parents are facing. As the coronavirus pandemic continues to disrupt lives, many working parents are really struggling. And so we're going to talk today about the realities that they're facing. We'll talk about how we got here and what the future looks like. And we'll share a bit about what employers can provide to help support working parents during the ongoing crisis. So the unfortunate reality is that there's not really a one-size-fits-all, easy, plug-and-play type solution. But we're going to show you how you can strategically engage to make the decisions that are right for your workforce and for your company. So just so we're clear on some terminology today, we're talking about working parents, and they fall into one of two camps. So the first camp, these are parents who continue to work outside of the home. So here in Massachusetts, we're calling these essential employees, and they include people who work in healthcare, in public health and human services, law enforcement, public safety. It includes people who are working in the food and agricultural industries, so that includes farms and grocery stores, food distribution centers. And it also includes people who work in the utility sectors, so energy, water, transportation, public works, infrastructure. And finally, it includes government-based services and operations, as well as critical manufacturing. So clearly, there's a big subset of the population that falls into this camp. So these are families who probably have access to childcare. Either they're keeping with their childcare that's available, or there are emergency childcare centers open for these families. But typically, these are the families who've been the most worried about potential COVID exposures, and that certainly results in a higher level of stress for these families. Our next group of families are those who in Massachusetts have been deemed non-essential and who are able to access work from home. So you may have seen this hashtag WFHWK, which to me looks like some interesting expletive, but it means working from home with kids. So for these families, their struggles have been different. They have really struggled to find creative ways to get work done and take care of their kids, support their kids' education. So this has been a huge logistical challenge that few parents have had any previous experience with. And both parents and companies have struggled to respond to this new reality. So for many families, it's some combination of these two, depending on where the parents work. Now, I just want to point out that I've intentionally chosen these two photos to demonstrate the essential and working from home with kids parents to represent all aspects of parenting. Historically, the burden of childcare has fallen on women, and we know from the data that's being collected that this continues to affect women more than men, but we don't want to pretend for 1 minute that this is just a women's issue. This is a parent's issue, this is a family issue, and it affects everybody. And so it's really important that when we start to think about how to address solutions, that we're being cognizant that families come in all different shapes and sizes. But first, sort of a recap of where we are now and how we got here. So in New England, as I'm sure you're all well aware, the pandemic hit here sort of the second and third weeks of March. So for those of you who are keeping track, like my kids, we're rapidly approaching day 100 this weekend. So for the last 100 days, working parents have faced a monumental challenge with exceptional amounts of stress and uncertainty. We're based here in Massachusetts, so I'm going to talk a bit about what's going on in Massachusetts, but I'll also reference things that are happening in New Hampshire and Maine, just so that we have a clear picture of where we all are. So for here in Massachusetts, at least, schools and childcare facilities, except those who remained open for children of essential employees, closed in this third week of March. But as the situation evolved, this became a much more long-term reality. And across New England, schools closed for the remainder of the academic year. Here in Massachusetts, childcare remains closed through June 29th. And I know that in Maine and New Hampshire, childcare facilities have remained open. But with many parents now working from home, they've pulled their children from childcare, either out of caution for health reasons or for financial reasons. So with enrollments down, the lack of income for childcare facilities make many wonder how or when they will be able to reopen or how they will be able to stay open, especially in light of the new CDC guidelines that both limit the number of children in one room and impose really strict cleaning standards. So childcare is not something that we're going to address in depth in this talk, but it's something to be aware of, that access to childcare has historically been a problem, and the issue is only going to be highlighted more in the coming months. So how has this impacted families? Well, for families where parents are essential workers, not much has changed in their daily routine except that they're under a whole lot of stress. Parents worry about COVID-19 exposures. They worry about their children's mental health now that childcare guidelines have been changed to reduce the number of people in a classroom. They're worried that their kids aren't interacting with other children as much. So they worry a lot about getting their jobs done while still keeping their families as safe as possible. So I don't want to downplay the stress or the changes that these families have felt. I mean, we have absolutely the utmost respect for families who have needed to keep on with business as usual, even when business as usual hasn't really been a thing. So for those of you who have parents in your workforce who have continued to come into work during the pandemic, please understand that they have faced some incredibly hard choices. For families who are now working in the home with children, they've moved from a situation where they had clear or hopefully somewhat clear boundaries between work and home life, but now those lines are very, very blurred. So they're trying to work a full day while simultaneously caring for their kids' needs, either in lieu of childcare that's now closed or schools that are now closed. And as the parent of 3 kids myself, let me just tell you, this remote schooling thing is no joke. So for most children, like infants up through middle schoolers, you can't just set them up in a room for 8 hours and hope for the best. For those of you who maybe don't have kids or it's been a long time since you've had kids, let's take a quick look at what this reality looks like for parents who are home. As we move to the next slide, there we go. So if you are a parent of an infant, it means you're constantly trying to figure out how you can get work done in incredibly brief moments in time. So babies need a lot of care, and you're trying to find ways to engage with your baby in developmentally appropriate ways. You're trying to find safe places for your baby to be during your Zoom calls or as pressing deadlines approach. You're negotiating schedules with your partner if you have one, and you're also likely operating on less than optimal sleep. Toddler parents, however, face a slightly different dilemma. Toddlers are incredibly curious humans, which on a good day leads to a lot of learning, right? They're testing boundaries, they're testing gravity, they're testing cause and effect, and that's all really good for learning. But on a bad day, that can lead to some dangerous and destructive events. The challenge here is that, unlike a baby, who hopefully, if you're lucky, naps often, or who you can put in a baby carrier or an activity seat. It's incredibly challenging to keep a toddler occupied for long periods of time, particularly if you need them to be quiet. Quiet just isn't a thing that toddlers get. And some of this holds true for preschoolers as well. So in the school age group, remote learning poses its own challenges. There's the technology piece, which, while I'm grateful it's available to us, comes with a pretty big learning curve. And that's not even mentioning like actually helping your child with schoolwork. So kids these days, they're teaching things differently in schools. So to help with kids' schoolwork, it often means that parents are having to learn whole new approaches themselves. I don't know if you've experienced any of the math that's being taught in schools these days, but it wasn't taught the way that we learned it. So we're having to learn an entire new vocabulary and an entirely new strategy. So in each age group, parents are really struggling with an impossible guilt trap. Like, do I focus on work? Do I focus on my kids? And just to highlight that, I want to show you a few quotes from parents that we've talked with. So Amanda and I run what we call parenting power hours. There are these great events where parents can get together virtually these days, though we do really love running them in person when it's safe. And it's where parents can discuss parenting topics. They can share strategies, they can share tools, and it also gives them an opportunity to build community. In the events that we've run lately, we're hearing a lot about the stress that parents are feeling. So I just wanted to show you these quotes that we've pulled directly from events that we've run, where we've heard parents talk about how the lack of school and daycare changes everything. And that's kind of the understatement of the year. Parents are feeling like the blurred lines make it really hard for them to feel like they're being successful at anything. There are constant interruptions. Parents are constantly switching hats back and forth between work and home, and there's a mental fatigue that's associated with that. And there is this guilt where parents feel like they're never out of sight, out of mind for their kids. Their kids know that they're home, but they see that parents are ignoring them or perceiving it as being ignored. And perhaps the biggest challenge is making sure that not only parents are balancing work and family needs, but that they don't exhaust themselves trying to do more because they end up feeling like they're shortchanging someone along the way. So as we look forward, what does the future look like? I wish we could say we had a really clear picture of what's coming, but here's what we know. Many summer camps have decided to close for the summer, which means that parents who had relied on camp to provide child care coverage during the summer are out of luck. For the camps that have remained open, parents are weighing the risks of sending their children and contrasting that with just absolutely needing to get work done. And camps themselves, like child care centers and daycares, look different with the new CDC guidelines. And there's a legitimate concern about how all of this works. Child care centers here in Massachusetts will be able to reopen soon. And I know that they're currently open in New Hampshire and Maine. But as I mentioned, they're facing really stringent CDC guidelines regarding the number of children who can be in the room, as well as some really intense sanitizing policies. So only time will tell how many child care facilities will be able to weather this storm. And that's something that you're going to want to keep in mind as the months go by. And the future of school reopening in September is incredibly murky. Schools are looking at, again, those same CDC guidelines of having limited people in a room, which then limits the number of students who can be in the building at the same time. So schools are considering a variety of staggered schedules, whether that's that your student is in school for a half day or every other day. So the logistics that parents are going to need to think through are really intense. Schools are also looking at continuing remote learning as an option. So all options are currently on the table, and we'll know more in the coming months what things are going to look like. It's hard to know how this is all going to play out, except to say that working parents 100% are going to be impacted unless by some miracle we'll be able to return to business as usual. And we all know that that's a really highly unlikely scenario. We know we can't return to business as usual. We can only move forward. And so why have this conversation now? right? We're nearly 100 days into this pandemic, and shouldn't we have figured this all out now? Why talk about it at this point? And the reality is it's not going away anytime soon. We know that the summer is going to look different for families, and how is your organization going to handle that? Unlike the crisis that started in March with very little warning, which left parents and organizations really winging it, you're now sort of getting a heads up. Fall is going to be different, and how will your organization respond to those challenges? So to explore that a little bit more, I'm going to kick it over to Amanda.
That sounds great. Thanks, Sarah. Rhoda, did you have anything you wanted to add this far, or any comments or anything? Or
questions from the group at this point? I'm not seeing anything come in. Sarah, as Sarah Rosedale did say, that even with daycares, they don't always have the forms yet that needed to submit to reopen, which is frustrating to everyone. And because we all know there are plenty of forms when it comes to enrolling our children in things and sending them back to school, for sure. So no, this is great. Continue.
all right, that sounds great. So as we're moving forward, I think that the word that we're going to keep coming back to is intentional, and moving forward with intentionality. I had a great conversation with someone in HR at Timken, Michelle Bernhardt, and we talked a lot about this, and she kept saying, like, that intentional leadership, the intentional thoughts and the word choices, being in the moment in conversations is really important. And being intentional with decision making and strategically thinking about that impact is going to be what brings us out of this and into a positive place. And Sarah and I have talked about this a lot, and I've talked about it with a number of people in HR, that as chaotic and crazy as things are right now, we have a great opportunity to make things better, to take the lessons that we've learned and change for the better. So not to get too far down the rabbit hole, these are all change models that I'm guessing most of you have seen and know, but just to touch on them briefly, this is a change model where you start out at status quo and then you go into chaos, usually when you decide to make a change. And right now we haven't decided to make the change was made for us. So overcoming that status quo and getting into chaos is where we have been, and now we're coming up on that integration piece, and we have the opportunity to make things, like you see on the right hand side of your screen, even higher performance than it had been. To look at it slightly differently, this is another model, but with the same idea that we plummeted through the endings, whether we liked it or not. We got into the transition where there was all of this confusion and frustration, and now we're starting to come out of it. And how we choose to come out of it is a big responsibility and a big honor that that we're willing to take on, right? That's why you guys are all here, is to do that. So what we are choosing at this point is, or what we're advocating, is choosing to create a parent-friendly organization, right? A parent-friendly workplace. And this is something that Sarah and I can talk about all the time, and I'm not going to touch on it a whole lot here, but this is what we do at Soutiens, is we work with companies to become a little bit more parent-friendly. And a lot of the key themes that we come up with over and over again are creating places where working parents feel valued and respected, and channels for the working parents to be able to share those perspectives and advocate for their needs. And that education, not just for parents, but for the managers and the teams that they work within, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then equality throughout the workplace, so that things are not just created for working parents, but to create a framework that working parents can fit within, and overall to lead with compassion, empathy, and creativity. So why working parents right now? I think that Sarah did a great job of explaining kind of the current situation and where we are. But just to put some research, sorry, going back a little bit. Just to put some research numbers along with that, we're seeing that 50% of families are without childcare right now. These are nationwide, and we know that New England kind of led the curve, and now other states that are seeing a surge are coming up with the same, are coming into the same position that we are now thankfully coming out of a little bit, but more than 50% are without childcare. And because of that, and not by any great surprise, more than 40% of these parents are saying that working from home is a balancing job, is balancing, and that this is a major challenge for them. And that nearly 50% of parents are saying that their performance has decreased, or that they feel that their performance has decreased. Whether it actually has or not is a different conversation. But we need to kind of be like this tightrope. Parents are walking uphill on a tightrope. So how can we be the supports that hold them on the side, and how can we wear that life jacket, or give them that life jacket to help with that security? And one of the reasons that this is so important is that we're worried about a talent drain, right? A talent drain that's coming up. We're seeing that currently 1 in 5 working parents are saying that they or their partner are considering leaving the workforce. I'm working with a family right now where both parents are high-powered in their positions, and the mom's just coming out of maternity leave, and she is fearful for going back to work without childcare, even though she's going to be working at home, saying, I don't think my company is going to keep me on because I don't have childcare. So whether that's true or not, that's a big fear that she has. And so when you start to have these parents choosing who's going to stay in the workforce and who's not going to, that's a problem for the companies. It's also a problem for the families. And more than 50% of the families are going to be losing income by having a parent or a family member stay home. And we all know, I'm preaching to the choir on this one, that once you start staying home, it's harder to get back into the workforce afterwards, which has long-term ripple effects, right? And then lastly, as Sarah had alluded to earlier, the burden seems to fall on the mothers. Dads are certainly stepping up and spending a lot more time with the kids and on the households, but mothers are feeling like they're spending even more time than the fathers are. One study was showing an average of 15 hours a week on education and household tasks, more than the fathers. So it's not 15 hours a week that they're spending, that's 15 hours more than their partner is spending. So this is just some major points that you are all here, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, because you want to stop that talent drain. You want to make sure that the gender equality that you've been fighting for stays intact. And so that's why we're really talking about what we're talking about today. So the big question for the next half hour that we're here is, I want you to be thinking about, in order for working parents to be successful, my organization needs to do what? And there's a lot of things that you can put on this blank space, and a lot of things that I know that you're already working on. And just the fact that you're here and participating in the conversation is a major step towards that. But keep this question in mind and start to think about, what are you going to fill into that space, and hopefully we'll cover some nuggets and tips that are going to be helpful as you are moving forward. So let's change topics a little bit and talk about ways that your organization can support working parents. So the first thing that we do, and I know that this is right in your wheelhouse as HR people, is to assess the situation. You can't move forward unless you have that data to do so with, right? So for this time, this moment in history, I would even say that this is more critical than usual. We often do, company surveys and engagement surveys and things like that. And basically, you sort of know what's going on, and then you get a little information to tweak it. This is such a whole new situation that we don't know what's going on. And every company is slightly different. So I can talk to one company and get a good grasp of their industry, and they are technology, they're mostly remote, they may not be going back until 2021. And then I talk to somebody who's in manufacturing and everyone's essential, right? So all of those needs are going to be different. So we recommend starting with gathering that company-wide input. So doing some listening sessions. Sarah and I have facilitated these at a few different companies so that there's a third party. It's not information that has the bias or the judgmental piece already on it, because we are all biased for our own companies, right? But those listening sessions allow people to share those ideas. Doing a company survey, and this is a familiar tool that people are using. How can you tweak it to be appropriate to this time period? And then align with your ERG leaders or your affinity group leaders. I know that there are some ERG folk on here. I've seen some of our friends from Akamai and Athena chiming in, and they are the eyes and ears of the working parents in the organization. They are hearing from the ground, and right now a lot of them are struggling with how to best support parents, and over again it comes up that one of the things that they can do is advocate and be the voice for the working parents with the leadership of an organization who may not be as close to the situation. So work with your ERG leaders if you have them, and if you don't have one, is there a way that you can make a focus group of some working parents so that you can have that point of dialogue? And then at the individual level, you're also going to be hearing this information, right? So talk to your managers. The managers are often the first line for an individual to talk to, and train your managers how to have those sensitive conversations. Everyone in HR for sure, but a lot of managers have also been through training about how to have compliance around things like ADA or, other complaints and things that are very sensitive nature. This is a time to reiterate some of that training and to make sure that managers are feeling comfortable having those conversations. And if they're not, that they know how to pass along to somebody who does. Ask about the barriers and challenges. So often people just pull up by their bootstraps and just do what they need to do, and they don't come to HR, right? And so what we want to do is make sure that you're actually going out of your way to ask about those barriers and challenges. And then we like to say, listen to understand, right? A lot of times we listen to respond, but before you respond, you need to really understand where this is coming from. And Sarah, I see your comment. Absolutely, that variation between managers is a big issue, and that's something that I'm going to touch on a little bit, and something that I think organizations repeatedly need to just keep chipping away at, and continue to work with HR and whoever the management education group is to try to bring that consistency. But we'll talk about that in just a moment, a little bit more. So starting with all of this information that you're gathering, it's really important to move from a strategic perspective. I was speaking with Jody at Orange Grove Consulting just a couple of weeks ago about how we can come out of this with positivity. How can we move forward and move that needle into a great place? And one of the themes that kept coming up is that moving from tactical perspectives is like a Band-Aid. It's great for the short term. It kind of fixes whatever's right in front of us. But in order to create this longer term change, or the culture that supports change, we need to lead with a strategic perspective. And that by, as you see here, by putting in that strategic mentality, then you can create a flexible framework. And then within that, you have the room for creativity and movement to experiment with different things. So if you start with a policy without thinking of the strategy first, there may be a misalignment. So definitely think about that strategic side first. If you're in a leadership position, use your position to engage in those strategic perspectives, and make sure that you're bringing along the leadership of the company so that everybody's on the same page to talk about your values and your company ethos going forward. And then once you have that in place, start to define what those standards are and set those expectations and communicate them. The metrics for success might be different right now. The flexibility might be different. I think this is a time to really evaluate, how are you measuring people? Is it FaceTime? Is it butts and seats, or is it more on performance and getting the job done? Are the hours able to be more flexible? And for some industries that works, and some industries that doesn't work. So you're going to have to look at your own situation and see how that goes. And same with your remote work policy. It used to be that Sarah and I came across a lot of people who said, our company is not set up for remote work. And now we all are set up for remote work. We've had to learn that and figure it out as we go. So that's less of a barrier. And now the question is more of, when is it appropriate and when is it not appropriate? Thinking through additional benefits. You know, maybe your company doesn't have a child care benefit before, but now it seems to make sense to have that child care benefit. And then defining what are the wiggle rooms for individual cases. Where can you give people those that flexibility and empower them to make those decisions? And then communicate it. Sarah mentioned earlier our parenting power hours, and some of those have been more community-wide or for networking events, and some of them have been very company-specific. And what we're hearing over and over again, and I see Sarah Rosehill, you're talking about this as well, is the difference in the way that managers are implementing these, that people are perceiving these. So there is no such thing as over-communication at this point. Just say, like, once you figure out what that framework is for your standards and your expectations, say it over and over and over again, and then live by it too, right? So we want to, especially in this time, lead with empathy. We recognize that not all companies are going to be able to do everything they possibly can, you know, everything for working parents that working parents wish that they could do right now. And that's okay. That's the boundaries within your company. But if you can lead with empathy and you can communicate that with compassion and have those honest conversations where parents are feeling heard and validated and understood, that goes a long way. And then empowering your managers to find those individualized solutions and developing win-win. So what's going to work for the family and what's going to work for the manager. And I even encourage all proposals to kind of have those two columns, like, why is this good for the company? Why is this good for the family? Just so that those conversations are being had and explored and people aren't feeling shortchanged one way or the other. But again, those managers have to be given the framework within what's acceptable and what's expected. And then encourage your senior managers to lead by example. I was speaking with, oh my goodness, I don't even remember which company right now, but it was somebody whose CEO had his daughter living with him over this pandemic, and she just had a baby. So he was a brand new grandpa. And he was coming on to the calls with the infant in arms, just showing, like, this happens to all of us. We all have kids. It's all expected. It's normalized. So to have your CEO and your senior managers and executives leading by example is going to go a long way towards that leading with empathy piece. And these are some of the questions that are just more open-ended. And again, preaching to the choir as HR folks, these are the questions that you're asking. But how are you really doing? Not just, hey, how's it going? How are you really doing? I really want to know. Tell me about your days. What does it look like at your house? What can I do to help? How is working from home going? What are you really enjoying about it? What's working well? What are the challenges? What are your kids doing this summer? What would make your life a little bit easier? Just by asking these, you'll start to get an insight into what parents are going through and then what they think would be helpful from their perspective. So one thing that I have noticed in talking with parents and then people more in the leadership or HR side of organizations is that so often people forget about what is already being offered by their organization. And I put EAPs right at the top of this. I feel like majority of companies have an EAP relationship or something along those lines that's similar, and the majority of parents totally forget about it. So reminding your parents and all of your employees, because we could all use a little extra support, what you currently have in terms of EAPs or other assistance programs. If you have backup childcare, remind everybody. Not everybody, people may have forgotten about it because they didn't need it before, but now they need it. If you have flex hours, make sure those are communicated. Your remote work options, bring your kid to work, whether it's an official thing that your company is doing, or it's just something that you want to be able to say, you know what, if you get in a gym, it's okay for your child to come in and hang out in your office and play Minecraft for the afternoon while you're in meetings. Just make that known that that's not frowned upon. Take the stigma away from it. And if you're ever exploring summer hours, this is probably the summer to really think about that and ways that you can roll that out. And we know that from talking to a lot of people, there is still that 1 in 5 that's considering leaving, that doesn't feel like this is something that is sustainable. And there has been an update to the FMLA policy in the CARES Act where people can take off some work, but I am going to pass that over to Rhoda just to say a couple of words about, because that's not my specialty.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, of course, you know, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act is still through December 31st of this year. And there may be some working parents that haven't taken advantage or haven't needed to take advantage of it so far that may need to pick up on it now, or maybe at some point during the summer, or even when the fall hits again. So remember that as a resource that you have to apply in terms of those 6 reasons by which they can qualify under it for some paid leave, some partially paid leave, and things of that nature. And this whole thing goes to what I've been hearing over and over today, which is it's all about flexibility and not one size fits all, because we've got to be very adaptive with the needs and the individual needs of each of our employees. And we just need to understand what the resources are we have for them, both from the regulation perspective, like the FFCRA, as well as perhaps community resources and what your company does, and being able to enroll your senior leaders in supporting the fact that this is the time to be flexible. This is the time to figure out how to measure things differently, perhaps, but still measure and still require performance where that's concerned. But these things are still in play and still available to you.
Thanks for explaining that. That was really helpful. And I'm going to kick it back over to Sarah Douglas to talk about some of the things that we're seeing companies explore right now.
Perfect. I think, you know, Rhoda, you touched on it so perfectly. We really have to be flexible, and we have to be willing to think outside the box in terms of being able to find solutions that work within the company but still meet the needs of the parents. So in addition to what you already offer as a company, we're just going to highlight some things that you may want to consider doing. So you may want to consider adding or extending benefits, or encouraging employees to consider alternative and somewhat unconventional solutions. So you can definitely expand childcare benefits, whether that's the benefit or if you're providing some sort of credit. You can explore partnerships with local childcare providers. So some providers will offer a discounted group rate. And the companies that we're offering, or that we're talking about here, we don't endorse any of these options. We don't have any partnership with any of these companies, but we just wanted to identify them as options for you to be able to check out. So most people are familiar with care.com, Urban Sitter. Milo and M is a new and upcoming offering in New England, so that might be worth checking out. They all provide slightly different services, so it would be a good idea to find out what your employees need before formalizing any sort of agreement with any of these companies. You can also promote childcare or nanny shares. So if you're not familiar with a nanny share, it's where 2 or more families will sort of join forces to share one childcare provider. And this eases the burden of cost for those families. And it also allows those kids to socialize with other kids. So it's kind of a nice blend between sort of a single family in-home care arrangement and using a child care center. Along those same lines, we're seeing a lot of families consider double bubbles and quarantines, which are arrangements where families agree to include each other in their socially distancing circles. So this results in having more adults be able to take turns in providing childcare. There are obviously some logistical concerns, and it also requires a high level of trust and commitment to the same COVID-19 exposure guidelines, but it's definitely something that we're seeing families look into. And as Amanda and I have both mentioned, we run these parenting power hours where parents are encouraged to share their challenges and their strategies and their tools. So along those same lines, that's something you can do. You can encourage your employees to share their favorite online resources. If you're a parent, you know that there are literally thousands of online options, and it's incredibly time consuming to have to sort through all of that and figure out which ones are good and which ones are age appropriate and which ones are worth it. So you might check into collecting this information from your employees and putting it in one central, easily accessible place. If you're really adept with data collection, it would be amazing to have it sorted by age or by grade or by cost or by time or anything like that. You just want to make it as easy as possible for your employees to find solutions that are going to work for their families. So as we look at flexibility next, it's really hard for us to promote any kind of flexible work arrangement that works for everybody. There is no one-size-fits-all option here. You all know your industries and your workforce better than we do. And as Amanda talked about earlier, having that strategic framework that allows for flexibility on an individual level is really going to be the best approach here. So that said, if you don't know anything about the needs of your employees, which I'm assuming you all do know, you do want to start with a survey of some kind or listening sessions or something where you're finding out what your employees' obstacles and pain points are. You can always do this yourself, or if you want to outsource this project, there are companies that will run this assessment for you. So Work is one of the ones that assesses flexibility and provides options for that. For overall flexibility, that benefits both parents and non-parents alike, because we know that that it's not just working parents who are struggling in this crisis. There are lots of employees who are facing caregiving challenges. And so whether that's caring for an aging parent or caring for a disabled relative, there are a lot of people who are looking for flexibility and who are needing support during this time. You could consider allowing employees to work unconventional work hours or go part-time over the summer. Can you encourage flexibility over the summer with extended work hours 4 days a week and then have flexibility on the 5th day? And then finally, can you explore some sort of work share? So if you have several employees who are really struggling and wish to go part-time, can they all share one part-time position? We really want to challenge you to think outside of the box. So we know that this is an incredibly challenging time for everybody. It's not just working parents. But we hope that we've brought to light some of the issues that parents are facing and provided you with some help in navigating how your company is going to be able to respond. So COVID-19 is temporary in kind of what feels like a really long-term temporary kind of way. Whatever you do now to help parents, the impact that you can make is huge. So we're going to open up for questions right now. So you can use the chat feature, and I see that lots of you have been doing that. And we'll respond to as many as we can get to in the remaining time. Amanda, what are you seeing?
I am stopping sharing of the screen so we can see faces of anybody that wants to. The questions that are coming up, Sarah Rosehill at Akamai has mentioned that she has a care.com partnership, and she's happy to talk to people about what that looks like and their personal network option. And also was shouting out saying if anyone has good resource lists for virtual camps, please share.
So Sarah Rosehill, I don't know if you've looked into it. OutSchool is an awesome online camp option. They're short little classes, but they're arranged by ages. So you can search for things that would be appropriate for different kids' ages or grades. And they are offering online options for a whole variety of disciplines. So it's art, it's music, it's engineering, it's math, it's a huge variety.
in our house, that has been how to take care of your bearded dragon. They have that at Out School.
That is cool. I feel like early in the pandemic, there were so many like what to do with your kid resources. And now like that has sort of dried up. And I don't want to have to like personally figure out like the list because you can go anywhere, right? There's not like a geo restriction. There's got to be so many cool things.
You know what? I've got a couple, a great email that came from an organization called First Connections, which is local here, but it's free fun things to do with kids, little kids online. And I will post that up on our Facebook page.
And
What
Abby brought up the comment that, you know, she has special needs kids. So her stress and her needs are much more complex. They're all complex, but they take on additional dimensions of complexity from some of the other parents that need to be discussed. And absolutely, you know, you have a lot of rights for accommodations, especially when you have a child that has special needs, that kind of thing, to be able to you know, get the support that you need at work from the people that you work with and work for, where that's concerned.
And I think that highlights the need of this strategic framework that then can be applied on individually based scenarios, right? We can't come up with something that is just, this is our blanket approach. It needs to be able to be something that can be tailored to individual family needs.
Yeah, and some of you may be concerned also, like, how do I get senior leadership? How do I get our CEO on board with this if they've been very black and white about this? And it's like, nope, back to what we were doing before. Is basically you want to counter with what the benefits are for the company to be flexible and adaptive. And do you want to attract and retain top talented people, including some of those that currently work for you that have these special circumstances that if we want to keep them in the workforce and they've been productive, we have to figure out how to do that and work with them to do it. We can still hold them accountable. We can still require they get the work done, but we just need to work with them versus just take a black and white approach that this is the way we do it and no other way. Because those companies are going to lose in the long term. They're going to lose good people. And other companies are going to start to hire those good people away because there is a lot more sensitivity in the clients that I've been working with to being flexible with the workers to work with them in a way that makes work for them.
I think that's something else to be aware of as we move through this pandemic. How your company has responded is going to be one of the biggest questions that you'll be asked by potential employees during a job interview. When you say, you know, is there anything that you would like to know about the company? But yeah, parents are going to want to know how you responded.
Right. Yeah, they really are, for sure. There's no question about that. And they're going to be hearing a lot about how companies did keep the communication up or how they did respond to these last 3 months and going forward as the slow staged reopening of workplaces is happening. They're going to be paying very close attention to that and making choices as a result of that as well. So it's reputational as well as bottom line importance to the companies to pay attention to it.
In addition, we're talking about parents here because that's what we focus on, right, as the working parents. But all of this is true also with caregivers in general. So someone might not be a parent, but they might have an aging parent at home. They may have a dependent adult that they're taking care of. So anything that you're thinking about with working parents, just expand to caregivers in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good point, Amanda.
And if you haven't seen it, care.com has an excellent report out called The Caring Company that talks about the cost to companies of ignoring caregivers and how much caregiving impacts the employees and how much the employers underestimate how much it matters.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You do see that quite a lot in terms of that underestimation or the responses, well, why don't you just, you know, and you need to figure this out. The well-positioned companies help their employees figure these things out because it's a partnership. We are all whole people. Our whole person comes to work and goes home, and work can be, you know, not just WFH anymore. It can be WFA, work from anywhere anymore, as so long as the work is getting done, the client or customer needs are being met, and we're doing the work in a quality, time sensitive way, and within budget that we're given as well. And so those are the things to strive for. I think I saw somebody earlier say that they had done a ton of training for managers, but managers were implementing it differently. And that's very true with any kind of program you roll out, whether it be this related to this topic or anything else, is every manager, every leader is unique, and they're going to execute or not in their own way. So beyond rollout, there has to be some sort of follow-up and some sort of measure and some sort of review. And the first few times this happens, let's do this together to be sure that we're having the conversations in a way that you know how to do this going forward, and we can support you with it, and we can be sure you're supporting the needs that we're asking you to do. Because you're right, a lot of times we roll programs out, they great, they put it on a shelf, and they go back to doing what they've always done. So it's the follow-up from those of you who are leaders that roll these things out to be sure these things are being executed in an appropriate way and meeting the needs of the employees that they're intended to.
Great points, yes. So I'm not seeing more questions pop up. We are going to stick around for a few more minutes in case anybody does have any questions, but I wanted to let you know that after this, we will be sending out a copy of the slides that we presented, as well as our contact information and a link to the recording of this video. So if you have colleagues or coworkers that you think would benefit who weren't able to join us for lunch, please feel free to share with them.
And I'd just like to say, I'm Debbie from KMA. I work with Rhoda. I just wanted to kind of put a plug in for the KMA HR consultants. Rhoda is one of our many rock star consultants. So any employers that you either work for or know of that might want some one-on-one work with how they implement their policies or handle employee relations issues in the workplace, all coming out of this parenting, conundrum that we're all seeing. Rhoda at kmahr.com. Shoot her an email because we'd be happy to help anybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Debbie. Very good point.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and definitely reach out to myself, Sarah, Rhoda, Debbie with any questions that you might have going forward.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you.